Hey everybody, it's Mr. Trainer, live for you guys, taped from North Beach High School on Sunday afternoon. I miss you guys. It's been quite a while. I've seen some of you guys around town, chat with you guys by text, by email, some by phone call. But yeah, I miss the classroom interactions, guys. So today we're going to work on amphibians. That's our subject for this week. We're going to see how we've changed evolutionarily from fish now into amphibians and move our way up through the rest of the chapters. So I'm going to go through my notes the best I can over the board. I'm going to kind of stand to the side so you guys can see as I do my PowerPoint presentation. You guys will see videos that are linked on the Google Classroom like before. So take a look at those videos. There'll be an assignment, as in a review worksheet, as well as this week a follow-up quiz to last week and a follow-up quiz to this week and some other material. So I hope you're all well. Let's knock this out and hopefully I don't screw this up too much, guys. All right, so amphibians, smallest group of vertebrates with only about 4,000 living species, and unfortunately, they are on the decline due to climate change, acid rain, as well as pollution within groundwater and discharge and things like that. Their numbers are on the decline. These are individuals that are tied to water, and when you have dirty water, in which these individuals you'll see breathe partly through your skin, you're killing them off. So they range from teeny tiny tree frogs, of which, I mean, you're talking about something that's a quarter the size of a postage stamp, all the way up to giant salamanders of Japan, which are about as big as me. No joke, I'll show you guys videos. They're descendants of organisms that have evolved some, but not all adaptations for land. And though they spend a great deal of time on land, they're restricted to moist areas, so that's why we see them, for the most part, in those types of conditions. And we'll see some exceptions as well, like the water-holding frog that can live in desert areas as well. So the name Amphi is both, bio is life, and this is because these guys have both lives, kind of. They start off their life in water and eventually end up on land. But again, like I said, they're tied to water, and a lot of times it's due to reproduction. Their eggs are very, very, very delicate, and they use diffusion from oxygen from the water for those eggs to make sure that they can actually develop. So adults are terrestrial carnivores that breathe through lungs, while our larvae are fish-like that breathe through gills, and we'll see exactly how these guys change, how they move along as well, evolutionary. So this is how we define them. They're aquatic as larvae and terrestrial as adults. They breathe with lungs as adults, and they have moist skin that contains many glands, and they lack scales and claws, which you can think about within other animals, things like reptiles, or even things like if someone was like a cat, or cat and frogs is related. No, cats have claws, and they don't have scales. All right, so amphibians, they've been around for a long time, about 360 million years or so. We think that they've evolved from what we're called lobe-finned fishes, which are the only one that survives today is the coelacanth, which is this kind of an interesting thing to where you actually have limb structures that we kind of think will allow these guys to be able to pick themselves up out of water and move a very, very small distance on land. Not only that, their bones are very much similar to that of a horse, with how those, well, I know we're not to horses yet, but how those fingers are formed together into a hoof, or in this case, formed together into plates. So most amphibians passed away. What we've got left is what we got left. Like I said, they're on the decline, unfortunately. So feeding, as amphibians, as young, these guys are filter feeders, and they have to eat an extraordinarily, there we go, large amount of food in a very small amount of period, or small amount of time. And if you think about that, if you ever watched tadpoles grow up, they develop quickly. So they develop things like legs, and they lose a tail, they get legs, they lose gills, they get lungs, their whole heart system changes, their circulatory system changes, their excretory system changes. And then when they end up, at the end, they've got lungs instead of gills, so they eat flies and insects and other animals, including mice, which I'll talk about later too, that are always carnivores. So if these guys don't change within this amount of time, they die. Because at this point, if you're still in this halfway point, you haven't developed lungs and water runs out, development ceases. So feeding. A lot of these guys have specialized structures, especially within frogs, that have hooked tongues to a degree, to where when that tongue is released outwards, when it attaches or when it hits that object, it microscopically adheres to it and is able to pull it back in. Some actually have muscular tongues that actually envelop around the prey that they're catching. Salamanders and legless amphibians can only open and close their jaws to catch their prey, so that's kind of a limitation. But things like frogs, especially like Pac-Man frogs, these things can eat mice. and they'll use their front legs really quickly to be able to get that food in their mouth to where they can chomp it down. And in some cases, these guys actually have teeth. So food travels from the mouth down the esophagus into the stomach, and then from there connects with things like the pancreas and other structures to where we actually have a true digestive system, to where now we have multiple organs working together, which we'll see in a second, that help absorb or digest food and have it be absorbed within that system. So the liver, the gallbladder, pancreas, like I was saying, those are all adding additional digestive enzymes. And then from there, food's going to travel through the small intestine until finally it connects to the large intestine and eventually into the cloaca, which is kind of like the do-all good ends of a lot of animals, much like chickens, birds, things like that. They have a cloaca, so one opening of which reproduction works as well as waste products come out. And here's a unfortunate mouse in the mouth of a Pac-Man frog. And some of these guys are cannibalistic, so we have frogs that eat other frogs. From there, waste can be expelled. Respiration, like I said, these guys in water, they use gills, but on land, they use lungs. But one of the things that most people don't think about within amphibians is a lot of their respiratory system is actually their skin and their mouth. So they actually give off carbon dioxide, so they exhale through their skin, and they can also breathe through it as well. So this is one of those things within clean water. If these guys can't, if they can't breathe properly within the water just because of those pollutants, they kick the bucket. As well as some of these, the chemicals that are in there really destroys their skin. And as a respiratory system, if you have broken skin, then you can't breathe as well. In addition, these guys also have large capillaries that line the surface of the skin, so that way you can have diffusion work really, really well. So frogs and toads, they can't inhale like us and exhale, so they actually have to force air in there using a glottis. So it's a force flap basically that acts up pushing it in, and muscularly they force that down into their lungs, and then from there they can release air back outwards, but also they use diffusion, so carbon dioxide can go out of there. All right, moving on. Internal transport, so heart. So this is a really neat system because now we're starting to develop very, very sophisticated heart systems within our animals. So if you go back to the last chapter, we talked about fish. I told you guys it was like NASCAR. So everything goes in one direction. Everybody's making a left-hand turn. Blood goes always in one direction and comes back. Now within amphibians, we start to see that we have a tie within our respiratory system. So now that we have lungs, we actually have to have a way of transporting that oxygen much more effectively. So we have two loops that work. We have a first loop that carries oxygen poor blood from the heart to the lungs, and then from the lungs back to the heart. From there, the second loop is going to take that oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body, and then that oxygen deficient blood back to the heart again. Okay. Again, we have a left atrium, a right atrium, and a ventricle. So in this case, last time we just talked about an atrium and a ventricle. But now we have a left and a right. So we have two muscular chambers that work within this. And as well, we have the return of a vena cava and a sinus venosus. So remember, those are very large structures I described last chapter that helps slow down the blood flow, helps it pull together before it empties back into the right atrium. And then again, left atrium, and then aorta, that big squeeze, and then blood flow comes out through that loop. And I know I'm sorry that I'm making this short, but this is also within your guys' notes, and I'll tie this together in some videos. Some of those atria contract. Like I said, the blood enters into a single ventricle. The ventricle pumps blood into a large vessel called the bulbous cordus, and then from there you have aortic arches. Then now where we have a branching system, like I mentioned last chapter, but we're going to get into, to where now we have this branching system to where blood can go to the brain, blood can go to other organs, and as well as coming back to the heart and the lungs to make sure that respiration is as effective as possible. But one of the things that happens in this system is within tadpoles, we have a two-chambered heart to start off with a single loop system like a bony fish, but then they mature and end up having that two-loop system with a three-chambered heart. Excretion, so the peeps and the poops. So I told you guys we have that single thing called the cloaca, which everything is going to pass through. But now we have kidneys. So now we can actually filter the blood, removing those nitrogen wastes, and applying it to actually a form of urine that can be passed out of there. So we actually have a urinary bladder as well as two small ureters that extend away from there to allow that fluid to be drained out of the individual. In some cases, like the water-holding frog, if you ever find yourself stuck in the middle, I think it's Australia, and you can't find any water, bang on the ground really hard, and if you hear a croak, dig underneath there, and you can get a water holding frog, and you can squeeze these things with your mouth on the end of the cloaca, and you'll get some quote unquote water that would possibly save your life. Nervous system. So response system, these guys, as you know, if you're walking around at nighttime and you're croaking, they can hear you. So they've got extraordinary ears. They don't have sound collectors like us, but they have the holes. They have exceptional eyesight. So these guys can see at night and dark. And some of these guys, they hunt predominantly at nighttime. And a special feature that they have for these guys to help them within being amphibious is they have what's called a nictitating membrane. That's a specialized membrane that kind of works like goggles for them, that just slides up and over place when they go underwater. These guys, as you know, they respond to each other. So as they're calling out to each other at nighttime, they're looking for mates, as well as they're talking about possible danger, so they're warning each other. They can't regulate their body temperature. So if it's a really cold day, they got to come out in the sun. If it's a really warm day, they got to go back out to shelter. And like other species throughout the year we've talked about, those that are highly venomous are usually highly brightly colored to warn other people, like, just don't mess with me. Reproduction. So within frogs, I'll stick with frogs, some of these guys sometimes, when they go to mate and they find a female, they use a specialized saliva or specialized enzyme out of their body that helps stick them to the female. And usually it's the first one that wins, but sometimes these guys can go in a chain, and this is called amplexus, to where these guys get stuck together. And like I said, it's usually the first one that is able to mate with the female, but the other 8 or 9 that are towed behind are there for the ride, just hoping they get it, or able to reproduce. So females can reproduce, in some cases, about 200 eggs or so. Tadpoles hatch within about a week to 3 weeks of fertilization, and then they have to move really quickly, like I said, is in eating to be able to pass along that weight or gain that weight so they can change to adulthood. We have all 3 forms of maternal fertilization. So within that, like we've seen before within fishes before, we talked about the amount of parental care that happens, as well as those methods. So we have some of these guys that are born directly in water, some are water land. Some of these guys have internal fertilization, sometimes external fertilization, and sometimes the care for these guys, the parental care is huge. Bullfrogs really take care, and it's usually the male takes care of the tadpoles, and they'll actually pick them up in their mouths and move them to other bodies of water to make sure that they live. Salamanders, really quickly, we have them out here. So you guys have seen salamanders and newts. We have a whole bunch of them in the Pacific Northwest. If you end up handling these guys, wash your hands. You don't want to get salmonella, as well as some other toxins in some cases, depending on where you're at. So most of these guys live in woods. They live underneath rotten logs and crevices, things like that. They're all carnivores. But like I said before, they can only open that mouth back and forth, so catching your food is a little bit harder sometimes. Sometimes with the crimson spotted newt, which we have up here, these guys will go back and forth between water and land. And within this, I think I can find the video for you guys. They travel huge areas of the Pacific Northwest to find a mate, and then mating in water. I'm going to skip over the crimson newts. Lastly, so I finished my last things. Frogs are tied to water and spend much of their life near streams and ponds. Toads, they live in moist places, but these guys have a tougher skin to them, and this allows these guys to live in drier places sometimes, and sometimes within deserts. Some toads burrow into the soil, and their water-permeable skin moves water out of the soil into the toad. So that's a way to think about that. Bury yourself in the ground if you're thirsty, and let your skin absorb all the water, and you had yourself a good drink. Some of these guys use toxins for defense. Marine toads, these guys are found in Australia. They can actually shoot toxin from glands over their shoulder, and I think it's about a meter or so, they can hit individuals in the eyes, which can cause blindness. So it's really great for these guys to defend themselves. Cane toads, also known as marine toads, are an invasive species, unfortunately, in Australia. Some tropical tree frogs, very strong poisons. These neurotoxins are still being collected by Aboriginal tribes to use in warfare. So very powerful things. But also, in some cases, we look at these things because we want to know how those neurotoxins work to be able to make sure that we can actually solve some of our issues with the nervous system, and why certain diseases like multiple sclerosis, to where the nerves attack themselves. What if some of these neurotoxins we can find the answers to and how they work to be able to solve certain diseases? I've got my usual how amphibians fit in the world. One thing I don't have on here is something to think about is food. So if you've ever eaten frog legs before, they are delicious. They are really good. Give them a try if you haven't. But one of the things is they're a huge source of food for a lot of people. And as these guys are dying out within numbers, that's another thing to think about within like loss of food, and also within these guys, their loss of habitat, which could also lead to a loss of food. Remember, I don't like to think about ourselves as the main species to think about. Usually it's all the other ones, but think about the amount of overfishing as well as pollution, water pollution, air pollution, ground pollution, all of these things that these guys face and the obstacles that they have to overcome. So I hope you guys are doing well. Give the video a watch. Check out my notes, look at the assignments. If you need anything, I'm always around, and I miss you guys, and I hope you're all well. Peace.